Senator Simons.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. One of my earliest memories from my first few months as a senator back in 2018 was a briefing we received from senior members of the Canadian diplomatic team who were involved in the negotiation of the Canada-United States-Mexico trade agreement, known at least on this side of the border as CUSMA. The briefing drove home to me just how difficult, how extraordinarily difficult it had been for Canada's trade negotiators to get any kind of workable deal with the Trump government, given the unpredictable obstructionist and protectionist nature of the Trump regime. CUSMA was signed on November 30th, 2018, 5 years ago today, and came into force in 2020. The deal is subject to review every 6 years, which means that our negotiators will soon be immersed in the difficult task of trying to get and keep the best possible outcome for Canadians, with no way to predict the outcome of the contentious and fateful 2024 American presidential election. What we can say is this: it would be a grave tactical error to send out Canadian trade negotiators to deal with this historic moment with one hand tied behind their backs. Our negotiators are going to need every bargaining chip and every tool at their disposal to protect the economic and political interests of this country. That is just one of the reasons I rise in the chamber today to oppose Bill C-282, an act to amend the Department of Foreign Affairs Trade and Development Act, Supply Management. This protectionist legislation would send Canada to the bargaining table at a distinct disadvantage by making 3 particular sectors of Canada's agricultural economy off-limits, denying the government its prerogative to get the best possible deal by making supply-managed goods sacrosanct. Under the terms of C-282, the Minister of Trade would be forbidden to make any commitment on behalf of the Government of Canada by international trade treaty or agreement that would have the effect of increasing the tariff rate quota applicable to dairy products, poultry, or eggs, or of reducing the tariff applicable to those goods when they are imported in excess of the quota. The effect of this would be to make our dairy, poultry, and egg sectors untouchable and supply management inalienable. It would not only hamstring and hamper the ability of our negotiators to get the best possible deal for Canadian exporters and importers at CUSMA, it would undercut Canada's position as an international champion of free trade around the world and undermine our ability to fight protectionist policies that discriminate against us. This will hurt us, not just in trade negotiations with the United States and Mexico, but with all our future negotiations and trade deals with Europe, Asia, Latin America, and the Indo-Pacific. In the words of the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, quote, "Tying the hands of trade negotiators before negotiations even begin will result in less ambitious outcomes across the board, as other countries will follow suit and exclude products or sectors from discussions where Canada has offensive interests," end quote. Then there is the issue of the precedent this sets within Canada. How long will it be until other economic sectors also ask to be excluded from trade talks, undermining the ability of this government or any future Canadian government to bargain holistically for the good of the whole nation and not to play favorites nor court regional interests? If we send out this loud signal that protectionism isn't just acceptable but desirable, we could erode the national and global consensus around free trade, which could be uniquely self-destructive for Canada. Canada is a country with a huge export economy and a small population. 67.5% of our gross domestic product is reliant on trade. Free trade matters to us and to our future prosperity in the way it does to few other nations. We are the world's largest exporter of wood, aluminum, potassium fertilizer, and canola seed and oil. Our top exports, meanwhile, are petroleum, cars, gold, and wood, sold primarily to the United States, China, Japan, the United Kingdom, and Mexico. And in 2022, we exported about $93 billion in agriculture and food products around the world. In order to survive and thrive in a hard-nosed international trade system, we need to be a clarion, stalwart voice in favor of free trade. Because if the world's economy becomes bogged down with a morass of tariff and non-tariff trade barriers, it will be particularly devastating for us as a trading nation. We frankly aren't a big enough economy nor a big enough population to win a global game of tit for tat. If we adopt protectionist policy in this part of our agricultural economy, we can expect retaliation and pushback in turn. How can we fight, economically or politically, once we cede the moral high ground? It would be impossible for us to demand that others reduce their tariff barriers without looking either like hypocrites or like the most naive of neophytes. Adopting this bill could, in the short term, prompt many of our trading partners to respond with threats to refuse to extend or modernize existing trade agreements. In the long term, it would erode our international respect on the world stage. If we want to be leaders at places such as the World Trade Organization, we have to have clean hands when we're advocating for a free and rules-based trade system. Allowing the creation of these bespoke exemptions for particular sectors, and via a private member's bill no less, would unalterably undermine our credibility on the world stage and the credibility of the government, too. Who, after all, is writing Canadian trade policy? The elected government, or a third-place political party which only cares about the interests of one province and not the interests of the country as a whole? I speak today both as an Albertan and as Deputy Chair of the Standing Senate Committee on Agriculture and Forestry. For my own region of the country, where we export not just petroleum, but canola, wheat, pulses, beef, pork, oats, and barley, among others. In 2022, according to provincial data, Alberta exported $206 billion worth of goods to market. And while energy exports were the largest proportion, we also exported $16.2 billion worth of agricultural products. Alberta's four largest markets were the United States, Japan, China, and South Korea. And Alberta exports were way up last year in all four markets, by 50% in the United States and by 343% in South Korea. Tit-for-tat reprisal tariffs against agricultural products such as canola, wheat, beef, or pork could be a body blow to the economy of Alberta and the entire Prairie West. And we need to ask, do we really want to pit agricultural sectors in this country against one another? Or regions and provinces against one another? We mustn't feed into the toxic discourse of Western alienation and Western separatism by creating the impression that we're sacrificing the interests of one half of the country to protect the other. But, Madam Speaker, this isn't at heart an agricultural bill. It's a trade bill. And it's not only agricultural products from my home province that might get caught in the crossfire. What might be the consequences of this bill on exports of automobiles from Ontario, or seafood from Atlantic Canada, or lentils from Saskatchewan, or wood and wood pulp from British Columbia? Then consider this. What would be the long-term impacts for Quebec, which exports everything from aluminum and platinum to aircraft, turbojets, and flight simulators? I'd argue it would be a poor bet for Quebec's economic future to put a cordon sanitaire around 3 agricultural products, thus putting at risk the future of Quebec's other exports. And let's not forget the value of the export market to our supply-managed goods. According to Statistics Canada, in 2022, Canada's dairy sector exported products ranging from milk to cheese to ice cream to whey protein worth $506 million. About 60% of that went to the United States, with another 17% being exported to African markets. And we're on track for even better numbers this year. Between January and September of 2023, Canada exported some $366 million worth of dairy products around the world, to everywhere from Australia to the Netherlands to Malaysia. This is good news, not bad news, for Canada's dairy producers. It would be wildly counterintuitive to risk losing access to those export markets by adopting a protectionist policy that might well make others retaliate in kind. We export our poultry, too. According to data from the OEC, the Observatory of Economic Complexity, Canada exported $226 million worth of poultry products in 2021. And in August of 2023 alone, Canada exported $22 million worth of poultry products, and more than half of that was poultry produced in Quebec. The main export markets for Canadian poultry? The United States, Gabon, the Philippines, Mozambique, and Guinea, with the Philippines being the fastest growing market for Canadian poultry exports. We should be fighting for access to those markets, not slamming the door on future trade opportunities. And at a certain point, we have to trust in our expert, proven trade negotiators to get the best possible deal for Canada at every trade talk, and to have confidence that they won't sell out our poultry, egg, and dairy producers. So let's come back to CUSMA, which did create a few concessions in the dairy sector, but which largely protected Canadian production. Just last Friday, November 24th, a 3-person CUSMA Trade Tribunal rejected an American complaint that Canada was improperly limiting access to its dairy market. In a 2-to-1 decision, the panel denied the United States 4 different allegations against Canada. In other words, far from selling out Canada's dairy sector, the strategic concessions which CUSMA negotiators used as leverage have still largely protected supply management. But if we pass Bill C-282, we deny our negotiators the strategic agency to make such limited concessions and to leverage the best possible deal. Finally, we come to the somewhat fraught issue of whether we have the right to oppose, amend, defeat a private member's bill. During the heated debate over Bill C-234, there were those who argued that we had no right to defeat or even amend the bill because it had been passed by the majority of members of the House of Commons. That was and is a dangerous argument to make because, of course, some of the very same agricultural lobby groups and senators are now hoist on their own petard for making that case. By the same token, some of the very same senators who tried to amend or defeat Bill C-234 will likely now argue that we cannot touch Bill C-282. Well, my friends, while I do believe that a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, I am proud to say that on this issue, at least, I am being wholly consistent. Let me quote back to you what I said in my speech about Bill C-234 just a few weeks ago. It is not the job of the Senate to accept and pass private members' bills without study and possible revision. If anything, private members' bills require more thought and study because they don't always receive the same scrutiny in the other place where partisan politics can play more of a factor than they sometimes do here. Just because a private member's bill wins enough votes to pass in the other place doesn't mean we should rubber stamp it here. We should hold it up to at least as much scrutiny as government bills. Those words were true about C-234, and they're every bit as true about Bill C-282. It is incumbent upon us as the upper house to hold bills like these up to strict scrutiny, precisely because we are appointed and not elected, and thus freed of the need to do what is popular instead of what is right. We are here on purpose to take the long view. We are here to consider the best interests of Canada, all of Canada. Now, we can certainly disagree sometimes about what those best interests are, but we can't hide behind some excuse that private members' bills are themselves sacrosanct. It is our job to do our job, to study and debate this bill fully and fairly, to hear from witnesses, to bring our individual expertise to bear, and to treat this as the serious foreign policy issue that it is. Thank you, merci, and hi-hi.